Hi, this is Bob Gaudio, and you're listening to Icon Fetch.
Welcome to Icon Fetch, the web's premier music interview show. Now, here's your host, Tony Peters.
The name Shel Talmy may not be immediately recognizable unless you're a liner note junkie, but you've certainly heard his work. Talmy is responsible for producing all of the early singles for the Kinks, including You Really Got Me, All Day and All the Night, and Sunny Afternoon. He also went on to do the same for The Who with their early singles like I Can't Explain, My Generation, and Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere. Friday on My Mind by the Easybeats is another credit. But probably the band he's most proud of is the one that didn't make it. The Creation had everything. Catchy songs, a flashy guitarist in Eddie Phillips, an incendiary live show, yet they never even made a dent in the charts in the United States. The Numero Group is getting ready to issue Action Painting, a 2-disc set bringing together everything this seminal band put to tape, including some brand new stereo mixes overseen by Talmy, plus alternate takes and an exhaustive booklet with multiple essays, session notes, and a treasure trove of pictures. It's an impressive collection for any fan of mid-60s British rock. And to talk about it, we welcome in legendary producer Shel Talmy. How are you, man?
Hi, Tony. How are you? Nice to speak.
Good to talk to you. Now, you were so high on the Creation and such a big fan of them that you ended up putting them on your own record label, Planet, and so you essentially own the rights to these recordings. So how did this deal with the Numero Group happen then?
It happened because of the fact that there wasn't really a label situation for U.S. and Canada, and the last few years it's only really been Europe and wherever else filtered down to the U.S. So I spoke to Demon, who had the UK rights for Europe, and told them that I really want to get the label situation. So that's how it eventually came about.
Nice. And then once you worked out that deal, is that when you started working on the alternate cuts and the stereo mixes, or have these kind of been in the works for a while?
Well, they've been in the works, but until such time as we actually got a deal, they were just that, in the works. And then we finally got it together, yeah.
Nice. When you're digging through all this stuff, was there anything that particularly stood out to you, that you maybe didn't catch the first time you heard this stuff long ago?
Well, as you already pointed out, I'm a huge fan of the band. They should have been equally as big as The Who, which most people who know the band acknowledge. And it was a pleasure going back through the tracks and remastering them. So that's basically what I did.
Now, if we talk specifically about the opening track, "Making Time," and this is the band's first single. And I mean, you'd worked, you'd had success with the Kinks, you'd had success with the Who. As you're laying this track down and you're playing it back in the studio, I mean, no doubt in your mind that this is a bona fide hit, right?
No doubt whatsoever. If there's a way to really foretell that there's going to be hits, that was one of them.
I mean, it's crazy. And I mean, it's hard to, I think there's lots of theories on, what happened with the band. And I mean, I think I saw in the liner notes that you had a deal with Phillips, and maybe they were dropping the ball a little bit on distribution. I know the band went through a lot of lineup changes, but it's kind of baffling that these guys didn't receive more success.
Well, I'm in complete agreement with that, including the fact that right at the time where I actually made a very large deal for them with a U.S. label, they broke up, and I just couldn't keep them together. I, to this day, regret that extremely.
Right, yeah. In the liner notes, you talk about the fact that you had made a deal with Atlantic. And, I mean, come on, that's... To be on Atlantic in about 1967, 68, pretty much everything Atlantic had at that point was turning to gold. So,
I made the deal directly with Numero Group, and because he knew the band and was a fan of the band, and when they broke up, it was really a sad day certainly for me, and I think for Rahmet as well, because he really wanted to promote him. So there was one of those things that happened, unfortunately.
Now, if we talk specifically about Eddie Phillips using the violin bow on the guitar kind of thing, first of all, I mean, he claims that was kind of his idea. Had you ever seen anybody do that before? And when he brought that idea to you, were you kind of blown away?
No, I've never seen anybody do it before, and he did that all on his own. And when I heard it, I said, "This is amazing." And of course, later, Jimmy Page picked up on it and started doing it.
Right. Now, did it pose any interesting, like how to actually capture that in the studio kind of thing? Was it difficult to kind of mic and get a decent sound out of that?
Not really. I guess I should preface this by saying I started out as a recording engineer and spent a lot of time trying to figure out how best to record guitars and drums in particular, because those were the two most difficult instruments to get, where I thought they should be. So when I heard what Eddie was doing, I applied some of what I already practiced doing for a long time, and it came together fairly quickly.
Nice. Now, if I ask you about a couple of the other tracks, Biff Bang Pow was... just a B-side, but it's certainly kind of an homage to the Who's My Generation. Was that accidental or on purpose?
You have to tell me which one came first.
Yeah, that's that's true. I guess it would be interesting.
I actually don't know.
Okay.
You'd have to ask Eddie, and unfortunately, you can't ask him because he's no longer with us. But,
right. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
It's a
Okay.
good question.
Yeah, it's good.
I'll ask Eddie then.
Okay. Well, I mean, what's interesting is I think either way, whichever came first, it certainly, I think, shows the influence that you had on the Who as far as their sound, because it certainly has very similar in that sound. And I mean, I think it certainly shows that you had a lot to do with that early Who sound, certainly. So.
Well, I like to think I did, and I've now heard from enough people to tell me that I did, so I'm going to acknowledge that maybe I did.
Maybe you did. Right. Exactly. One of the most curious songs on this new collection is Sylvette's. And it sounds like an instrumental of Leaving Here, which it probably was, but do you remember anything about like why they titled that? And it was maybe, was it ever going to have vocals? Do you remember back to that session at all?
Yeah, I remember it, but I don't remember that it ever was going to have a vocal. It probably would have at some point, but I think we did the instrumental and left it that way.
Right. Okay. One of the issues with the band is they just couldn't seem to keep the members in the band kind of thing. When they would come in the studio and suddenly they had a different lead singer or something like that, it's kind of hard to keep momentum going, right?
Well, we had the two lead guys here, Kenny Pickett and Eddie Phillips, and as good as everybody else was, these were the two guys that were really the band. The problem that I finally found out that existed is there was never a problem between Eddie and Kenny. When Bob Garner came in, evidently he was an irritating situation in the making, and it evolved so that's what eventually broke them up. And Tony Stratton Smith was the manager, who was a terrific guy, and one of the few managers I really have always thought of as being an excellent manager, besides being a good guy. And he couldn't get them together, or maybe he should have tried harder, I don't know. I've spoken to Eddie about it, and he regrets it also, to say the least. So eventually Bob left, and we brought in various other people, and like I said, we had Kim Gardner played bass for us, and Ron Wood played, and we had some damn good musicians in the band.
Right.
But the bottom line is that the two lead guys were the band, and everything revolved around them. So other pieces that came in were fitted in nicely, I think, maybe the best way to put it.
Right, absolutely. And it was interesting to see just in these short time the band was actually around. They definitely there's a lot of evolution from, say, Making Time into something like Life Is Just the Beginning kind of thing. There's definitely some more psychedelic elements kind of thing. And, it was like they were certainly growing as a band. And yet, did you ever get the impression in every session that the guys maybe were starting to get frustrated by this lack of success?
Well, they had huge success in Europe.
That's true. Right. Okay.
We had number ones throughout Europe, especially Germany was a major market for them. And it did get into the charts in England, not nearly as high as I wanted them to, but they were there. And, of course, I was waiting for that big deal for the U.S., which I think would have put them over the top. And so the unfortunate thing is that they become a cult band, quote unquote,
right?
Instead of being where I think they should have been.
Right. And I noticed, of all the stereo mixes, Making Time is only available in a backing track. So was it impossible to actually, was only made in mono kind of thing?
Yeah, that was the first track we did, and at that point in time, we just did a mono, and of course it was a powerful mono, and I'm sorry we never really got into stereo, but I didn't make that mistake again. Right.
I got you. So, if we go back in time here, you're from Chicago. You moved out to L.A. and did some recording work there. How did you actually get to England? An American producer in England. It's kind of wild because I think people might see your name and don't realize that you're from America producing these British bands.
Well, actually, it was reasonably simple reason. The band that I went to work for at Conway Studios was English, and he kept extolling the virtues of England. And his name is Phil Yend, and I'm glad to say, still with us. And I thought I would take 5 weeks off and go see Europe before life passed me by. I was in my early 20s, and I had actually just right before I left gotten a 4-single deal with Era Records, and I said I'll be back in 5 weeks. And 17 years later, I finally made it back. I went. That was really the reason I went to go see. I wanted to spend some time in England. Wanted to see if I could work a week or two because I didn't have much bread, and wanted to go to France and maybe Italy if I could afford it, and like that. And going into England, I said I was trying to work so I could earn some bread, and I walked into Decca, and being very young and very brash and not really caring because I was going to go back anyhow, I told Dick Rowe, who was the head of A&R at Decca, that I was probably the greatest thing since sliced bread was invented, reel off a whole string of hits I hadn't done, because my friend Nick Benet, who was A&R at Capitol, gave me his acetate and said, go use them. And so I played Lou Rawls and the Beach Boys that he gave me, and Dick said, you start today. So by the time they found out it was all a bunch of lies, I already had a huge hit. So
nice. And what was the first hit that you had then in the UK?
Charmaine by the Bachelors.
Charmaine, I wonder why you keep me away.
We did Charmaine. I was not wild about it, but it became a big hit, so there you go.
Yeah, I played that back. It doesn't really have the signature Shel Talmy sound, I would think you would say.
Oh, hardly. No, they're not that kind of band.
Right. So, I mean, here you are, 1962. You're in England, and all of a sudden, this whole thing is just ready to explode. And here you are, a producer. I mean, it kind of pretty good timing there, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it did. If you believe timing is everything, then certainly my timing was spot on. You know, when I got to London and obviously then found my way down to King's Road in Chelsea and realized that there was a group of maybe 400 people down there in all the various phases of the art and with a lot of talented people, and all of a sudden the whole thing exploded, you know, and music and film and fashion, you know, Mary Quant was down there. It was an amazing experience, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. It was really totally unique.
Right. Now, one of the bands you worked with, they were originally known as the Ravens, and they changed their name to the Kinks. What did you think of these guys when they were they really rough around the edges when you first got a hold of them, kind of thing?
They were okay. Well, the way that happened, I was down visiting a publisher in Denmark Street, which is where most of the publishers were, and one of their managers walked in with a demo, and he said, is anybody here that would listen to it? And I said, I'll listen to it. I'm here. And really liked the songs I heard. I went to see him, and I brought him into Pi, and we kind of went from there. They were, like most English bands at that time, I'd have to call them polite. That's the way the music sounded. The kind of guitar sound that I eventually got with Dave Davies and with Townsend was really not happening. And so that's you know, whomever you wish to tell people how it evolved, it's, you know, they'll have to make up their own minds. I guess I was among the first to do that anyways.
Right. Now, I've read interviews with Dave Davies where he said, you know, he took a knife and stuck it into the cones of his amplifier or whatever to get that distorted sound.
He had a little teeny green amp, and we used to kick it on the way back, you know, going by it. And so we could get a nice, really raunchy sound out of it, and we did.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like nothing else. I mean, and even to this day, over 50 years later, you put that record on and it has an immediacy that's just unparalleled. It's fantastic. And
no, I agree, and I think that the riff that Dave did has become so iconic that anybody who's involved in rock and roll pretty much knows what it's all about from about the first bar or two.
Right. Now, when you're recording that particular track, and I mean, it's just there's so much praise that's been lauded on that. I mean, is that something that just sort of came together organically, that sound, or had you been kind of working on sort of a distorted, rough sound prior to them?
Well, no, that's what I said I'd been doing when I was working at the studio in L.A. I spent a lot of time getting those kind of sounds and pushing it as far as I could. What I did when I was trying to work out sounds at the studio was pushing the level of sound as far as I could go. And what I finally evolved doing was to put one of the tracks of the guitar into somewhere where I was going to get it as distorted as possible, and then use another channel that was just the guitar as it is, and put the two of them together with the distorted version underneath, and it made the apparent sound a lot louder and a lot more raunchy, and that's what I was going for. And so I brought that with me when I came to London, and it worked out with the Kinks in particular.
Right, right. Now, I mean, there's been a lot. I'm sure you've been asked it 1,000 times, so we'll ask you 1,001. You know, there's the whole thing about how Jimmy Page, right? Right. Even before the question's asked, Jimmy Page did not play on "You Really Got Me," right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous anyway. Now, you said though that it's possible he played rhythm guitar on the track, right?
Yeah, I think he may have. I can't remember if he did or not. I hired him to. I'm not even sure I did that because I hired him to play for the album, which came after You Really Got Me. And he played rhythm mainly because Ray didn't want to play guitar and sing at the same time because he wanted to concentrate on his singing. And that's the reasons. But he never played lead in anything. Right,
right. Okay, see, there you go, once and for all. So... So, I mean, around the same time, you know, the Who, I mean, supposedly you read where Pete Townsend, I Can't Explain, was almost kind of, you know, it was like an homage to You Really Got Me kind of thing. And this band caught your attention, but a totally different kind of band, you know, certainly not a copy of the Kinks.
Oh, a totally different band. When I went to go see them I think pretty much everybody knows I saw them at a church hall. They were rehearsing, and I literally 4 bars in, I said, I'll sign them. They were the most impact band I think I'd heard in England at that time. They were just immediately there in your face, and I loved it because, as I said, at the time, when I got there in 1962, and if you speak to anybody who was around at that time, they'll tell you the music was very polite.
Right.
And I guess I didn't want to be polite, so the Who were a total breath of fresh air as far as I was concerned.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's, I mean, you know, the single Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere it may be the first time that feedback was ever used on a single.
I believe it was, yeah.
When you and Pete were working on that, was there a lot of experimenting before they actually laid the track down? I mean, in order to get that feedback at just kind of the right time and everything?
No, well, what I did was I got Pete in the studio on his own, and we experimented with, I mean, I pretty much thought I could mic it because, again, this is something that's done back in L.A., but I experimented with micings in different places. What I wound up was a 3-mic situation where I had one close mic, one about 3 feet from where his guitar was, and then another mic at the other end of the room to catch the feedback. And I was, because of the positioning, I was able to get the feedback sound that I wanted. So it worked out great.
Nice, nice. I mean, I'm impressed that this stuff still sounds that good 50 years later. I mean, those mixes that you did are phenomenal.
Well, needless to say, I'm extremely pleased that it's held up all this time and that it still sounds relevant and that it does not sound like it's something that should have gone out with an old pair of shoes. So
right.
I'm very pleased about that.
Absolutely. All right, let me ask you about just a couple other bands briefly. The Easybeats you worked with. with you did Friday on My Mind. Was that a band that you thought was you thought higher of than just a one-hit wonder kind of thing?
I did, but I really didn't have an opportunity to do more than Friday in My Mind. They came to London from Australia with their manager, and he apparently did some tracks for United Artists that they disliked intensely, and so they came and asked me if I'd want to do them, and I'd listen to them. I liked what they did, especially I liked their songs, but I didn't think I heard anything that was going to be a single. Of course, we were in a singles market at the time. So actually, I tell you the story because my then secretary reminded me of it several years later, is that they used to come up every Friday with the songs they'd written during the week. And, the bottom line is I said, no, come back next Friday. About 5 weeks into it, they came up with Friday in My Mind and said, okay, now we're going to record.
Right. That's good. Oh, what a great, and that's a timeless classic too. It's a great tune. So, and you worked with a very young David Bowie, but obviously, kind of rough around the edges. Did you have any kind of inkling that he would go on to have the kind of success that he did?
I knew he was going to be a big star. He was brought to me by somebody I knew when he was 17, and I loved his attitude. I loved everything he did about it, and I think I'm safe in saying, and David would acknowledge this if he was still with us, that what we did then was about 6 years ahead of the market, unfortunately, because what he eventually wound up doing was pretty much almost exactly what we had done at that time. And I'm sorry about that, because I'd like to have been the one to establish David as he eventually became, but it didn't work out that way.
Didn't work out, right. So, and I mean, eventually things kind of tapered off for you. Was it kind of the idea that things got away from the singles market, and then suddenly people were taking up like whole album sides for songs, and we were just kind of getting away from just the single as a thing?
I think let's just do a 30-second bit on this. I did continue. I did have hits with Chad and Jeremy and Pentangle. I did several albums with, which were very big. I did Amen Corner. I did The Small Faces. I did Manfred Mann. I did a lot of other people. The bottom line is I got bored, and I freely admit it, and I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. And I started doing other things. I started book publishing, all sorts of other things. So it's my fault that I didn't continue on for a long time.
Right. I mean, I noticed you got a website, sheltalmy.com, and on there, I mean, you talk about how if somebody wants to submit something, you'll listen to it.
I do that, yes.
I just kind of, I'm curious, wrap this up, the last question of, it's like, I don't know, it seems like we haven't had a big trend in popular music. When you were, doing things 50 years ago with the Kinks and the Who, what you were recording was music that was on the pop charts. And it seems like there was always like a trend happening in music. And I just feel like, at least in America, I feel like we've been stuck in a rut for like 15 years.
You've just very nicely explained the reason why I haven't been doing much.
Right, yeah.
Because what I have said to various people, I don't think I've gotten an answer yet, is tell me something that's in the charts now that anybody's going to be humming about 4 or 5 years from now.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't get an answer to that. So I'd like to think it's changing slowly. I think maybe there might be a second British invasion because they're actually doing more over there. It's a lot more music over there than there is here.
Good. Well, see, that's what we need. We need something to shake things up badly.
I totally agree.
So, fantastic. All right, well, Shel, it's been great talking to you. The new CD from The Creation is called Action Painting, and you can hear Shel Talmy's work in all his glory there. I appreciate you talking to us, all right?
My pleasure. Nice to speak to you, Tony. Take care.
You've been listening to Icon Fetch with Tony Peters. Want more great interviews? Head over to iconfetch.com. There, you'll find every interview we've ever done, plus CD reviews, This Day in Music, and a random album of the day. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Who is Tony going to interview next? It could be you. Send what you've got to Tony Peters. Icon Fetch, P.O. Box 292134, Dayton, Ohio 45429. Or email Tony at host@iconfetch.com. Until next time, this is Joe Kelly. Have a great day.